What's up, guys? It's your boy Ray coming at you live and direct from home. Today, we are going to talk about Ben Tenzer, John Wallace, the Nuggets kind of personnel management as a whole. Because as much as I want to give all attention and credit to those two as individuals, I do think you kind of have to evaluate it in the aggregate because there are going to be factors that some of them are in their control, some of them I think are outside their control, and I want to include that in the conversation. Before I get to that, though, just to chat a little bit about the playoffs, Wemby is. I mean, I don't want to spend 20 minutes gushing over Wemby, but I gotta say, every one of these guys, your Porzingises, your Bol Bols, your Brandon Ingrams, I think they've all kind of aspired or been drafted with the aspiration to be what Wembanyama is right now. The combination of the length, but also the skill set, the investment, the way he has developed his body to withstand the pressures and burdens that he carries, and just the mentality, the competitive spirit, I think, is uncommon in players, I think, of his size, because a lot of the times when you play basketball and you are that size, the game comes to you very easily. You don't get much asked of you. You just have to, uh, even players a lot smaller than him, are raised with the expectation that you're going to stand around the rim, maybe finish some plays, otherwise stay out of the way and let the other guys do the ball handling, the playmaking, the shooting, all that stuff. Where the takeaway that I have that I hope the Nuggets start to apply is that I hope that when we look at players with these kinds of physical tools, we don't put them in a box. I think that's kind of the death of a lot of would have been great players, is that too early and too often they get put in like a box of like, you can do this, that, and that's it. Where I think from a very young age, I think Wembanyama had, partly because of his international background, I think Wembanyama has had a much wider array of expectations, and in the assumption that he's working towards being a whole, complete basketball player. So I want to give him that shout out, dog. He is the best player in the world to me right now. I got to give him that credit. What he does on both ends, the impact that he has on the floor, the impact that he has in the minds and hearts of his teammates and on the opposing team and on the fans and even just on the game, I think has been so impressive. To come back to the Nuggets and their personnel management, Ben Tenzer, John Wallace, the 10-year kind of starts in that offseason where they trade the 2032 first round pick and Michael Porter for Cam Johnson. They save $15 million. They bring in that allows them to bring in Jonas Valanciunas, and they also sign a couple guys on minimums in Bruce Brown and Tim Hardaway Jr. That was their first offseason. They're going into their second. So far, I've got to say, I'm not particularly impressed. While I do think they deserve some amount of grace for the fact that I think the situation was imposed upon them, that it very clearly feels like a mandate from ownership that they had to shed that salary. I do still take issue with the fact that there is no, to me, if you are a good organization, there is no situation where you should be trading a better player for a worse player and attaching draft capital to make it happen. That doesn't make any sense to me. That points to an issue that I think Denver has had before, which is I don't trust these guys on the phones. When it comes to the negotiation of things, I think the Nuggets are showing that they can be a team that can get taken advantage of. If I'm being honest, they could do more this offseason and get a little better in that sense and make better deals They're going to have to if they want to do anything competitive. But they've really put themselves in a hole with just the sheer volume of just poor value trades that they've had to make. And again, so kind of looking back to what I spoke about in the Kroenke um, episode, if you want to call whatever these are, when we're talking about how they got here, well, some of it is that you could say they're giving out bad contracts. That also goes to a point for me where those contracts are also a product of the fact that Denver can't really compete on the market for players. That it seems like every time Denver has to retain a free agent or sign a free agent, they've got to spend more than they probably need to. And to me, some of that has to be a tax Denver is paying for the ways in which the organization cuts corners, the facilities, the culture around the team, the are you really, I think team players recognize a good organization, an organization that takes itself seriously, that has standards, that has expectations, that is focused on success. And I think they're oftentimes willing to take a little bit of a pay cut if it means being a part of that success. However, Denver doesn't give that impression. They, from ownership down, from the infrastructure of the team, both physically but also personnel wise, it's a constant issue with players that you want to say, oh, well, Denver has a winning culture. I don't see it. The last 3 years, it hasn't been there. And if you are a free agent, I don't know why you would come to Denver with the expectation that you're going to win a championship. Certainly with the roster as they are constructed. So they've got to get thoughtful about who they trade with and who they make deals with, because you have to overcome all of that. Free agency probably isn't going to be the way that Denver builds into the future. And what we are collectively trying to think about and decide on is, what does Denver do from here? Do they kind of cobble together what they can with what they have under the limitations of saving money and try to be competitive in that context? I would have a lot of issues with that, just because we've already seen what trying to be competitive while saving money looks like. We just saw it. This is a worse team than they were. This is a worse team than they were last year, in my opinion. This isn't even a team that would have taken the Oklahoma City Thunder to 7 games. Part of that is some guys are getting older. Jokic is getting older. Aaron Gordon is getting older. Jamal Murray, as much as I'm impressed with him and how he took this year seriously, he is also getting older. And where you would expect a pipeline of players to come in and fill those gaps, there's also a lot of issues where this isn't just a judgment of the front office, because I think there's a lot of factors in this, but when you look at asset management as a whole, Denver has a number of guys where it doesn't feel like they're optimized in that asset management process. You've got a Christian Braun who is coming off maybe one of the worst years of his career from a valuation standpoint, walking into $22 million next season. You've got a Peyton Watson who isn't going to be under contract, so now you have to sign him if you can, which you can if you want to, enough. But now you have him going into an offseason where he needs a new deal, and he actually just had his best year where he finally got both. I think he grew as a player, but also I think he got an opportunity set that makes a lot more sense for his value on an individual level, but also as an individual contributing to the team, right? The fact that he's not taking him a little bit more out of like, oh, you just play the dunker and you play defense and you go stand in the corner and that's what we're going to have you do, to, well, we're going to put the ball in your hands a little bit more. We're going to have you initiate actions. We're going to have you use the fact that you can kind of get to the spots you want to get to whenever you want. Shows, I think, the potential that he has, but also has Denver in a position where, while they can't compete on the free market for players at a competitive level without overpaying guys, having to be in the position of retaining him. And so now it feels like you've overpaid Christian, but you've put yourself in a position where you bet against Payton effectively and you're losing. Saying that, oh, Payton can't do these things, and that just hasn't been the case. So it feels like you're not internally evaluating your own talent properly and utilizing your own talent properly. And you got some guys behind them when you look down the roster, your Jalen Pickett's, your Julian Strawthers, your Zeke Najee's. I get that Zeke's not the best player in the world, but it would mean so much to this team, especially for a team that's starved of defense and physicality. See, you can say what you want about Zeke. He can't. He's not a high skill player. I think not a lot of ball skills. He doesn't have a handle. You're not always going to trust his jumper. You're not always going to want to play through him in the post. But he can move his feet. He has a certain level of strength to him. He's a good defender on a team that doesn't have good defenders. And he can't see the floor when you are desperate for that skill set. So you kind of have him, who is on like this long, would be cheap if he was in the rotation deal, but is really expensive if he's not playing. You have him. You have, again, going back, a Jalen Pickett who for another year kind of got supplemented by some veteran Tyus Jones guy who, I have no interest in a long-term Tyus Jones tenure in Denver. That doesn't make any sense. Because the reality is he might be a secondary ball handler for you, but he's such a liability in literally every other context. You're talking about a team that lacks athleticism, that lacks size, that lacks physicality. He compounds every one of those issues. It is a recipe to get bullied again if you want to keep playing an almost out the league Tyus Jones. And yet, Denver can't seem to help itself when it comes to making sure that even if you don't want Jalen Pickett on the roster, it would have been so much towards getting him off the roster if you had played him enough and even if you have to think a little bit creatively, utilizing his skill set. And maybe that comes with accepting the ways that he isn't conventional, but even so, utilizing the skill sets that he does have, embracing that, and getting the most you can out of him, whether it's for this year and for this team or trading him. And it kind of goes down the line. DaRon Holmes, another situation where you did all this to draft him, and I get that like injuries are injuries and that sucks, but for a team that really didn't have a lot of forward depth, especially as like that supplemental big he can space the floor. We saw that he can pass, he can dribble, he can make good decisions. Really, a lot of the things that Zeke can't do, DaRon can do. And funny enough, some of the things that Zeke does well, DaRon isn't there yet. I get that from a physicality perspective, he's a little thin. He probably isn't a guy you want playing the 5 or asking to be the primary matchup from a rebounding trench work perspective. But at the same time, he does all these things that I think the team could really use. Again, spacing, secondary playmaking, being able to make that extra pass, being able to contribute on the board just by the virtue of he's 6'10". So the fact that he hasn't seen the floor this year doesn't do anything for Denver, doesn't do anything for him in the process of getting to a point of being a guy you trust, but also doesn't do anything for Denver in the process of, well, if you want this guy to have enough value that you can trade him for something, or even just getting rid of him, you can't even do that. And that seems to be the biggest criticism I have for the front office and the asset management. So if I'm going to give a grade so far, if I was giving a grade in a vacuum, I would say I'd give them a C. If I'm grading them in the context of the fact that some of this, I think, ties back to the coaches that they've had and the, I don't want to say prejudices, but the, for lack of a better term, prejudices, presuppositions about who players are and what they are and what they aren't and who they're supposed to be, and that lack of willingness to put trust in the fact that Denver brought them in for a reason. Um, if I'm going to give credit for the fact that some of the decisions, I think the Cronkies almost certainly had something to do with the fact that they dumped all this salary and made it a mandate for them to dump all this salary and put them in a position where maybe dumping one of your best draft assets in the process of downgrading from a better to a worse player. I don't want to say I'm not trying to say Cam is a bad player. It's just you didn't get the floor spacing from him. And you can say, well, he does all these other little things. You need the floor spacing. You need the rebounding. Those are mandatory. A secondary guy who can dribble, that's nice. Cool. But you needed the rebounding and you needed the floor spacing. And Denver did not have that. And it was a big part of why they got overwhelmed by teams that can just blitz Murray, blitz Jokic. Where they can go from here, they're going into the draft. I'd really like to see them reinforce the front court. I think it makes a lot more sense. This is moving away from the grade itself, moving into like what I'm hoping for. I'd like to see them pursue more size, length, physicality, athleticism, things you can get in the draft that are going to pop and have an impact on the team in the short term without that player needing to be the next all-star draft pick. I think that that's really, as much as, yes, they need another ball handler and need more creation, they need a better counterpoint to Jokic than Jamal, with respect. Whether you want to say Jamal needs help or we need to find a replacement for Jamal, whichever of those things, whatever you want to do, Denver, I think, can find that in a more effective way on the trade market. I don't always trust them on the trade market, but on the trade market or the free agent market, where, again, do players want to come to Denver? I don't know. But you draft a guy. Swain is a guy, for example, who's been mocked to Denver a lot. And I see some of the value there. But at the same time, if they bring in another 6'6" guard, effectively, I know his label is a wing. He's playing. I think if he's playing the two, he's neutral to slight positive in size, athleticism, tools, physical tools. If he's playing the 3 or the 4, I think that's you're playing undersized there. And then you have the question of, can Swain be the floor spacer that he needs to be for it to make sense for the Nuggets? Because if he's not, as much as you like his slashing, once he's off ball, and he will be off ball a good amount, he becomes a bit of a liability. Whereas so you're counting on him developing those skill sets and being potentially, if you want the value out of the pick, you're looking for something that can kind of like relieve Jamal of those duties. And I think that's just it's a lot of gamble at a position where Denver already has a number of guys, talking about Peyton, talking about Christian, talking about Julian. I'd really like to see them get a guy who can be physical, maybe play the 5, but also sometimes play the 4 next to Jokic, where he can relieve Nikola of some of that physical burden of having to get every rebound, of having to set every screen, of having a guy you can throw a lob to on occasion that can kind of Yes, that's not a ball handling supplement for Jamal, but it is an outlet. When teams do press you and they double you and they harass you, an athlete at the 4 or 5 spot, I think, does so much more to give you. Maybe they're not lateral floor spacers, but vertical floor spacing is real, and Denver doesn't have it. There are a few guys I would talk about, but this video is already long enough. Those are my thoughts on the front office and like the state of the front office, to the extent that Ben Tenzer and John Wallace are. Who's in charge really? Again, is kind of an open question. Is it the Cronkies, or are they being allowed to do their jobs? We'll see. But I will chat with you guys later. Have a great day. Drink lots of water, and I will see you next time.